Do you have an idea that could help improve education? Or know someone else who does? Fancy winning up to £10,000 to help turn those ideas into reality? Well, the Cool Initiatives Education Challenge 2019 is now open for applications. And by entering your idea or business, you could win from £500 as a finalist to £5,000 for runner-up, and a cheque for £10,000 will go to the winner. What's the catch? There isn't a catch. The cash is yours with no strings attached. You want to buy biscuits? Then buy biscuits. But we would hope that the money is used on something that does turn your idea into reality. So who can enter? Those with a business already, or those with just an idea for a business? All we ask is that you're based in the UK and have not had any equity investment already. For more details, take a look at our website, coolinitiatives.com/competition. And please, just get in touch if you have a question. Cool Initiatives already works with over 12,000 schools every day, with 20 years' experience of building and sustaining a profitable business. We want to be able to use that experience to support others at the very start of their journey, and the Education Challenge is our commitment to those who want to make a difference. So again, to find out more about the challenge and to enter, visit coolinitiatives.com/competition.
Hi everyone, I hope you had a mammoth week, whether you were at BET, Learn It, Davos, EWF, in your mum's garage plotting your new Edtech startup, in your classroom inspiring the next generation of thinkers and doers, or kicking back listening to the Edtech podcast in the car. We salute you. And a big thank you to Cool Initiatives for sponsoring this week's episode. If you were in London, you may have heard that the UK Secretary of State for Education, Damien Hind, revealed government plans this week for a £10 million investment fund to create a marketplace for education buyers during his keynote at BET. Here's his speech on all of that.
Welcome to BET 2019. Actually, the most amazing, brilliant showcase of education, technology, and innovation at its very best. Actually, not just its best, but its biggest. So here we are at the 35th BET show, bigger than ever. It just keeps on growing. And speaking of keeps on growing, we're really proud that this show happens here in London because we are very proud in the UK of our Edtech sector, the fourth largest in the world, with a projected export value of around £170 million. That's over $200 million. And I want that to keep on growing as well. But of course, here at BET, you see products and innovations and services from right across the world, as well as from here in Britain. You might say it is a sort of an Aladdin's cave for the education geek. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I have a confession to make to you. I am that geek, or at least I used to be. Now, I wonder if any of you are old enough to remember this from your youth. I certainly am. This was one of my hobbies when I was a child growing up, coding, or as we used to call it, programming. Sitting in your bedroom trying to get a game out of something as simple and straightforward as a Commodore VIC-20. And for any of you who are not old enough to remember what these types of technologies were, a Commodore VIC-20 was something you used to plug into your telly, and you'd plug in a tape deck to load up programs. It was something about the size of a small coffee table with about the same amount of memory. And I compare that now to something like Fortnite, which my children tell me does not actually take 14 days to play, but does seem to take something like 14 gigabytes to download. It was hard writing a playable game with 3,583 bytes of RAM. Hard, but not impossible. In fact, in some ways, when technology was simpler, life was simpler. And when I took my first job at the age of 17, or at least the first job that I had to wear a suit for every day, it was at IBM in Manchester. And it was possible back in those days, in 1987, as a 17-year-old to be taught in half a day how to take apart a PC and put it back together. And actually, if I reflect back to those times in the late 1980s, I'm struck that actually we had most of, or all actually, of the core ingredients of office productivity that we have today. We had spreadsheeting, we had word processing, we had slide design, we had database, and we had desktop publishing. There is the classic Lotus 123. Who's old enough to remember that? But I'm struck by the difference between having groundbreaking innovation and then having the sorts of great leaps forward that make those innovations work at their full potential, at their full scale in the mass market. And of course, today we still have spreadsheeting and word processing and database technology and so on. But it was the graphical user interface and point and click technology which made it available to that mass market in an accessible way. Back in 1987, I was a bit weird because I worked at IBM. I had an email address. But if I said that to any of my friends, they had no idea what I was talking about, because it took a number of years and a period and 3 more letters at the end of every email address to make it actually work for the consumer. It took the internet, the biggest leap forward of them all. And speaking of leap forwards, let's leap forward to where we are today. And we have some astounding examples of education technology available. You'll see many of them in the halls out there. And actually, you can see many of them in use, in very active and productive use in our schools in this country today. Such as at Bolton College, where their chatbot called Ada, named of course after the great Ada Lovelace, is enabling personalised learning for 14,000 students, but also being able to deal with so many routine and quite a lot of not so routine questions to relieve the burden of administration on staff. Or High Furlong School in Blackpool, where they're using technology in very innovative ways to support their students with special educational needs and disabilities to get the very most out of their education. Or Sandringham High School, where they're using technology to create a generation of discerning consumers of information, being critical users of technology and searching out bias online. So there are many encouraging and very positive things happening in education technology. But Edtech also faces some particular challenges, I think, unique to the education sector. One of them is that Edtech sometimes gets a bit of a bad name because this is one of the few sectors where technology has been associated for some people not with a decrease in their work, but an increase. And one example of that is email. Now, email is great when it replaces other types of communication to make things more productive. But in education, what you often hear from teachers is that it hasn't replaced anything, it's just added to it. And to deal with this, we need schools and leaders to think in innovative ways, and then we also need the edtech companies also to come up with more solutions. Now, of course, one of the very best things about technology, and one way in which it has changed remarkably since the 1980s, is its ability to crunch large amounts of data and often, though sadly not always, turn that into informative analysis and charts and outputs. But of course, the data has to come from somewhere. And this is another way in which edtech, technology, and IT can get a bit of a bad name in the world of education. Because the sheer volume of data that is required or is asked for to be inputted into these systems can create an additional burden on teachers. Then there's the market itself, and there's probably no better example of an efficient market working well than here in the Excel Centre in January 2019, bringing together buyers, sellers, the interested, the curious, to come together to taste and see what is on offer. But away from BET, there can be some difficulties with how the market works for EdTech products. If you are a teacher, you're a school leader or a head, actually it can be very difficult to know from this vast range of what is on the market really what is good. From the point of view of a seller, particularly if you have a devolved system as we do in this country, and we are very proud of our devolved system in education and think it is a great strength, but that can also make it hard for a seller to reach the buyer and to be able cost effectively to do their marketing and their product exposition. There can be a very understandable nervousness on behalf of schools dealing sometimes with brands and names that they are not familiar with and wondering if they can be certain that these will be around in a number of years' time. And then there's the issue about making a commitment. Once you've signed up for a particular piece of software, a particular program, it can feel like you're locked in. And that can both make people stick with things perhaps longer than they would have done otherwise, but also make them more reluctant to take them on in the first place. And that can mean some wastage, which is a serious issue. A serious issue because EdTech is now big business. Here in England, EdTech, or technology in general in schools, now has a spend of some £450 million a year. So we need to make sure that money is being spent effectively. So from this spring, we are going to be shaping our EdTech strategy for England. And it has a number of different elements to it. One of them is our friends at BISA are running a number of roadshows around the country which have already started bringing the tech to teachers, to enable more schools to see what is on offer, to see what is possible. They are free, they're happening right throughout the country, and I'd encourage you, if you haven't already, to sign up to attend one. We also want schools to be able to see good tech in action, and that's why we're going to be rolling out a network of demonstrator schools and colleges where educators can get the sort of peer-to-peer support and the training that they tell us is important to them, and raise their confidence level and skill in using some of these key products. We need to have a trusted single place, an education destination, if you like, where people know where to go for education products and services. And by the way, this isn't just for teachers, but also thinking about parents and direct consumers of education services as well. And finally, because of those challenges that I mentioned with the way that markets work, we need to have an informed marketplace where people can buy with confidence, and that also makes it more effective, more efficient for sellers to market their wares. And an important part of that is this product, which is being trialled by BISA, launches today. It's called Lend Ed. So it's an opportunity with tech products to try before you buy. It also allows teachers to write reviews, and you can see case studies and get hints and tips and advice on how to get the most out of these products. And if you do then go on to buy the product, you have the reassurance of knowing that the companies involved have been vetted. So I want to make sure that in our education system we are able to make the fullest use of the complete range of opportunities available through EdTech. But I also want to make sure that we are able to be specific in what problems we are trying to solve. Now, we have set aside a £10 million innovation fund in order to help to drive this forward. And part of that is going to be about addressing some very specific challenges. These are real-world issues that exist today that we can look for new solutions to. And they cover everything from administration, assessment, learning at all stages, teaching practice itself, and then the professional development of teachers. Now, I could have a lot more than 10 things up here. I mean, just if you look at special educational needs, could be expanded into a number of different items. And in different countries, there may be a different list. So, for example, there'll be places where accessing remote or particularly sparse rural communities is a very important thing to develop. But I thought 10 was quite a lot already, and we wanted to have focus. So these are the 10 we are going to be focusing on. And each one of those, they're just a pithy little phrase, but each one of them has a very specific challenge attached to it, and in most cases a measurable, definable metric as well. For now, let me just talk about 3 of them. First of all, on lesson prep. I want to see what technology companies can come forward with to help to cut the time that teachers spend on preparing and marking homework and in-class assessments. Obviously, this is absolutely vital work. It is at the core of what we do in school. It's at the core of what teachers are about, but it takes too long. And so I want to see what we can do through technology to cut the time doing that by 2 hours a week or more. Secondly, the engagement of parents. And obviously, parents are crucial to children's education. Again, I think there is an opportunity here to cut the amount of time that this takes while enhancing the quality of interaction with parents. And as an example, we already have some schools in the northeast of this country where they've introduced an online learning journal, which enriches the amount of information available to parents and their involvement in their child's education and the progress they're making, but without adding pressure or more pressure onto teachers. And finally, for now, beat the cheats. So we know that the growth of essay mills, sort of the subcontracting of work, if you like, and the older problem of plagiarism, these things, of course, undermine the great work that students do at university, and also over time actually undermines or erodes the validity, the value of qualifications themselves. And software exists and is widely used to try and identify plagiarism and abuse, but it seems also that the problem persists and in some ways, in some cases, seems to be getting worse. So for us to keep up with this, we need to make sure that we are not just up with the cheats, but one step ahead of the cheats and get smarter in the way we do it. And for all of these 3 and the other 7 on the list, there are 3 further tests which I think need to be woven through them. The first is that things have to be cost effective. Ideally, actually, to reduce the cost that schools are expending on these things to free up more resource for teaching and learning and all the other important things that schools do. I also want it not only to involve a manageable amount of teacher workload, but to cut the amount of teacher workload that is being expended. And finally, and most importantly of all, of course, it's all about outcomes. It's all about enhancing learning so that more children can do better learning and fulfill their full potential. Now, I think you're all showing remarkable self-restraint, by the way, by sitting here listening to people doing PowerPoint presentations. I apologise for that. But there are some fantastic presentations coming up after mine, which I hope you will enjoy. And I know then you're going to want to get out into the Aladdin's cave out there to see the full breadth of all that is on offer. I do believe we are truly on the cusp of amazing things in education technology. And there are some truly amazing products and services out there. And I say amazing in the truest sense, that when you see them, you are actually taken aback by what is possible. But in some ways, I still feel we're still in 1987, that we have a lot of these brilliant innovations, but we need to make more connections. We need to create conveyors to bring these things to their fullest potential throughout our system. And BET and the opportunity you have today to be with colleagues and innovators in this system from around the world is an unrivaled opportunity to do that. We must never think about technology for its own sake. Technology is an enabler and an enhancer. And ladies and gentlemen, you in this room are a big part of that, because we need a partnership approach between educators and innovators, between the technology companies, and government has a role as well, to make sure that we work together to forge those brilliant tools for a brighter future for all our children. Thank you.
If that wasn't inspiring enough, I caught up with one of our listener heroes, Mitch Resnick, the originator of Scratch, during a sit-down at BET. Here he is talking projects, passion, peers and play, and why these 4 Ps are pretty paramount to perfecting pertinent ideas. Okay, so I'm back at BET, hooray! And I'm here with Mitch Resnick. So currently Lego Professor of Learning Research, if I've got my homework correct, and an absolute legend in the kind of edtech, educational innovation and sort of wider field. So I've put in my notes here, for many listeners, you'll be, such an exciting guest to have on for us. So thank you for making the time, first of all.
Well, it's great to be joining you.
And from a little bit of online stalking, your doctoral advisor, if I understand correctly, was Seymour Papert. You're behind the invention of the ever-popular Scratch, programming software for kids, and obviously there's a whole myriad of other projects that we'll probably learn about. So I guess my first question is, what's your current thinking dedicated to, and what have you been talking to people here at BET about?
I think in almost all the work that we do, our primary goal is helping kids develop as creative thinkers. We think there's nothing more important in today's world than the ability to think and act creatively. Things are changing so quickly in the world that we don't know exactly what kids will need to know in the future, but we know that they'll need to come up with creative solutions to the unexpected situations that they undoubtedly will confront. So whether we're developing new technologies or new activities or new strategies, we're always thinking, how is it that we can help kids develop as creative thinkers?
So, that's really interesting because I'm moderating a panel on Friday, and it's about early years innovation and early years education. And I'm sure part of that discussion will kind of fall into how do we, there's this whole discussion about how you close or don't close the attainment gap, for example. And I've been reading about, the idea of attention and focus and sort of trying to hone these skills perhaps where sometimes they're lacking. But then at the same time, we know that it's through creative thinking and play as well that we kind of come up with some of our deeper ideas and connecting across ideas. So yeah. How do we kind of broach those two things?
Well, I think sometimes when kids seem not to have attention, or if they have attention problems, sometimes it's because they're not given the chance to work on things they really care about.
Yeah.
So in our work, we're always trying to see how can we allow people to work on things they really care about. Because we've seen over and over that people in general, kids in particular, are willing to work longer and harder and persist in the face of challenges when they work on things they really care about. So I do think it's important for kids to be persistent and to be able to work through things. But it's not a matter of teaching them persistence, the abstract. Mm-hmm. It's helping them identify their interests, to be able to find things to work on they really care about. And then we've seen in a lot of settings, we have these after-school centers called computer clubhouses, and there are some kids who hadn't been doing well at school, were seen as having attention problems at school. When they come to these after-school computer clubhouses and they find a project they care about, that they're willing to work hours on end, and it amazes their teachers who never imagined that these kids could do that.
Yeah. Well, that brings me to the lifelong kindergarten group at MIT Media Lab, and unfortunately I didn't have time to sort of delve into that too much, but I was sort of thinking lifelong and kindergarten, is that sort of oxymoronic? And then I was wondering whether it was the idea that we embrace play across our lives and establish lifelong learning, or establish lifelong learning at sort of the kindergarten age onwards. So what was the kind of thinking behind that group, and what do you do there?
So I've always been inspired by the way children learn in kindergarten. If you think of the traditional kindergarten, children spend a lot of time playfully creating things in collaboration with one another. Building a tower with blocks or Lego bricks, making a picture with finger paints and crayons. In the process, they learn a lot. When they build a tower, they learn about structure and stability. When they use finger paints, they learn how colors mix together. But even more important, they learn about the creative process, how to start with an idea, create a project based on that idea, share it with someone else, get feedback and suggestions, experiment with it, keep adapting it and revising it over time. And that's where creativity, that's where the creative process comes from, is that type of constant experimenting, exploring, and expressing yourself. So we see kindergarten gets kids off to a good start, But too often kids then move on in school and they sit in their desks, listen to lectures, fill out worksheets, and they don't continue to develop their creative capacities. So I called my research group the Lifelong Kindergarten Group because we want to take that same spirit that we see in the traditional kindergarten and bring it to learners of all ages. So when we've worked on projects like Scratch and Lego robotics, those aren't meant for kindergarten kids generally. It's generally for older kids.
Yeah.
But they're designed to be used in that kindergarten spirit where kids playfully create things in collaboration with one another and in the process develop as creative thinkers.
Well, it's interesting that you talk about that because I think I'd love to hear your thoughts on where sort of coding initiatives have gone. So we've kind of almost come like full circle, I feel, with coding initiatives and obviously talking about sort of future skills and the skills gap and coding. Someone the other day was worried, they were talking to me and they sort of said, I'm worried that we're developing the sort of digital burger flippers of the future. And to what extent, will we develop creative coders or ones that, how much of that will be automated to some extent and how much will allow for our creativity in coding?
Well, I do worry that many coding initiatives focus too much, in my mind, on just helping kids prepare for jobs as future programmers or computer scientists. And don't get me wrong, I do think there'll be great job opportunities there.
Yeah.
That's not our main goal. The same way, I really like the comparison with learning to write. Some people will grow up and become professional writers, journalists or novelists, and it's great to support them. They do wonderful work. But that's not the reason we teach everyone to learn to write. When you learn to write, you learn how to organize and share and express your ideas. And that's the way I like to think about coding as well. That coding shouldn't be just for people who plan to get professional careers as coders, although some will do that. But everyone should be able to use coding to express and share their ideas as they do with writing. And the same thing, too often when schools teach kids to learn to write, I think they spend too much time focused on grammar and punctuation as opposed to letting kids learn to express themselves through writing. And I want to do the same thing with coding. Coding shouldn't be focused just on the syntax and the technical detail. For me, I think learning to code should be about giving you a new voice so you can express your ideas by making your own animated stories or games.
And you mentioned journalism there, and you had a stint as a journalist, a tech journalist, is that right?
Yes, I started right out of college. I worked for like 5 years as a technology journalist covering Silicon Valley. So I was writing about early...
Wow. So when you were covering Silicon Valley, what were the big things happening then? Because I can imagine some big changes during that time.
Yeah, so while I was covering it, it was in the early days of the personal computer. So it was right before the Macintosh computer came out. So it was like the Apple II computer and how people were starting to use that. And it was right when the IBM PC came out.
And the amazing Apple advert with the very dystopian...
Yes, 1984.
Yeah.
So it was quite a while ago. But it was really as people were just starting to get an understanding of how computers could be used as a means of expression. The computers were seen as things that you just use to solve a problem and to get a business job done. And I think in the early days of the personal computer, companies like Apple and conferences like the West Coast Computer Fair were saying that no, computers can also be for everybody to express themselves. And I think that did inspire me. In fact, it was at a West Coast Computer Fair, probably in 1982, that I first met Seymour Papert.
Okay.
And I heard Seymour talk about his vision for computers in education. So remember, this was in the early days of personal computers just came out. And many people, when they thought about computers in education back then, thought, oh, computers could be great for delivering instruction or giving quizzes, and they'll know if you answer right or wrong and give you a next problem. And Seymour Papert was saying, no, that's not the way we want to use computers.
Yeah.
Computers should allow kids to create things and express themselves. And that really appealed to me. It felt like it was respectful to children and enabled children to use the computer in a way that was really meaningful to them.
And there's some amazing artwork that has come out of that as a result. And it made me think of the Kraftwerk song about computer love or something like that? I don't know if you've ever heard that. But you're still very much immersed in the research and I'm interested. So I interview a lot of people on the podcast, and I sometimes feel like this sort of pedagogical research that people refer to is very much of that era. And I wonder if you could share, some of the newest research that's coming out that you think is interesting and how it might inform, we have all these products and solutions and around us, but which are the sort of pieces of research that you think people should be looking at and taking inspiration from as well?
Well, in our work, we're often guided both in the things we create, but also in the research we do on what we call the 4 Ps of creative learning: projects, passion, peers, and play. I think we've seen in our research that kids develop their creative abilities best when they're working on projects based on their passions, in collaboration with peers, in a playful spirit. So let's take the P of peers, which highlights the social side of learning. It's one of the reasons why when we developed Scratch, we didn't just develop a programming language, but we integrated it with an online community so kids could share their creations with one another and learn with and from one another. So we have students, graduate students in our group doing research on studying how kids learn through remixing in Scratch. When they take someone else's project and they remix it to make a version of their own, is that closer to just copying, where they're just making a copy and they don't really learn anything? Or do they learn new things when they start with someone else's project and make a variation? And I think we've seen that creativity really spreads through the community, and people's first step in new forms of creative expression often come when they start from someone else's work and do a slight variation of it. So, we look at each of those 4 Ps and study how and what kids learn and how they develop their creative abilities as they work on projects based on their passions and collaboration with peers in a playful spirit.
How do you see that playing out, when you're having conversations here versus the US? I mean, obviously there's lots of similarities, but do you think that conversation is slightly different?
I'm not sure that there are really big differences there. I think sometimes the biggest difference is not geographic, but just there are these very different communities among educators and researchers. And some people will only be convinced of things if they get a numerical result, and they want quantitative measures to show, what percentage improvement when someone did something. And I think there's a challenge because a lot of the things that I think are most important developing as a creative thinker is very, very difficult to measure quantitatively. So a lot of times people talk past each other, and the people who want quantitative results oftentimes will introduce things that are easily assessed, in a quantitative way. For me, I think we shouldn't focus on what's most easy to assess, but rather what's most important for kids, and then find ways to assess it. So we take a much more qualitative approach in a lot of the work that we do, where we collect portfolios of projects that kids create. And if you look at the portfolio of what kids create over time, you get to see that the way they progress as creative thinkers. But I think that's a much bigger divide of how people see what's a valid way of assessing what kids are learning and how they're developing. And also, I think there's another big divide just on the goals of education in general. That for me, a very important goal is helping kids develop creatively and helping them develop their creative capacities. So that influences the type of activities and technologies I would develop and use. If other people are more interested in how kids learn a specific concept, you might take a very different approach. So I think we have to start from, what are the goals of education, and try to get, some answers to that first.
So you're sort of sat in front of me, and you have this amazing, you're sort of grinning, and you're so enthusiastic about everything. And so for people listening in, obviously sometimes if they've been working in education for, 10, 20 years, or, they're in a startup and they're working 14 to 18 hour days, whatever's possible. How do they keep that creativity? How do they keep that energy and not get sort of stuck in the ruts of processes?
Well, recognizing the great value and importance of the things you're working on. If you don't recognize the value and importance of what you're working on, it's going to be very hard to put in the hard work that's needed, that's needed to be creative. I think to do things well, you need to work very hard at it. And I think you're going to work hardest if you're working on things that you really care about and you think are valuable. So for us, that's always where it comes to. So, I think that we're always trying to see how can we, I think that's what keeps me going, is that I see the importance. I think it's so important to give all kids from all backgrounds in all places the opportunity to explore, experiment, and express themselves. It's the way they're going to be most successful and happiest in their lives. And it's also just the most humanistic way of approaching it. of giving them the opportunity to find their own pathways.
Rather than sort of squeezing out skills that are just for, you're going to go into this job, or it's very kind of linear in that way.
No, and I know this can be difficult to bring all those possibilities to all kids everywhere. It's not that it's easy. It's important, but it's not easy. I sometimes describe myself, I say I'm a short-term pessimist, but a long-term optimist. Okay. Because I know how difficult it is to change educational systems, and how difficult it is to change people's mindsets. If people have a certain way of thinking, if they think education is about delivering information and instruction to kids, it's not easy to change their minds about that. Mm-hmm. So that's why I'm a short-term pessimist, because I know it's going to be hard, but it's so important that I'm willing to work very hard to try to change the way people think about it and to change those educational structures that get in the way. Too often schools are set up where disciplines are separated from each other. Kids of different ages are separated from each other. Classes are only 50 minutes long and you move on to the next thing. It's really hard to have a project-based, interest-driven approach to learning when schools are set up that way. So in the long term, I think we need to change, but it's not easy to change those types of things. But I'm long-term optimist because I just know that the approaches that we talk about with projects, passion, peers, and play will enable kids to succeed in the future. So ultimately, people will see the need for this type of approach and it will win out in the end.
Who do you find inspiration from? Do you read a lot of books, or are there any books that you'd like to share with our listeners, or other podcasts, or people that you just find inspirational that are sort of doing some of this work now?
One book that I read recently that I like by Ted Dintersmith. It's called What School Could Be.
Okay.
And what he did was he went around, this was in the United States, he spent an entire year just visiting schools and learning from what good teachers were doing. And he comes up with these great examples of all the different ways teachers are making things possible for the kids in their classrooms. So it shows what's possible. There are all these constraints that I just talked about, all these challenges, but good teachers are finding ways to succeed in sometimes very challenging settings. And I think Ted's book does a great job through the hundreds of schools that he visited over the course of the year. He tells the stories that I think do a great job of documenting what's possible.
There's a few of these kind of, we had like Cleveland's, I don't know if you've heard about that before, by Lucy Crayon. And here we've got Edtech 50 schools, where they sort of went across the United Kingdom visiting different schools. And I think it's brilliant because it just puts forward those case studies of things that are actually working and helps people contextualize it a little bit.
I think we can learn and be inspired by great examples. The same reason that with Scratch we have an online community, so kids can be inspired by what others create. Educators should be able to be inspired by what others are doing and learn lessons from that.
Okay, well, thank you so much. What's next for you? Last question. Going forward, next 6 months, what does that look like?
Well, we just came out with a new generation of Scratch called Scratch 3.0.
Okay.
So it's so exciting to see what kids are creating with this new generation. And we designed the new generation of Scratch so you can keep having these extensions, keep adding more modules. So I'm really excited that we now have a platform that we keep expanding and keep seeing all the wonderful things kids are doing.
So what are some of those modules? What might they be adding?
So some of them are connecting to the physical world. So you could use Scratch to get sensor data from your microbits.
Okay.
Or some of them are connecting to web services. So, right now there's a module for doing text-to-speech, so you can make your characters actually talk. Later this year, we're going to have speech recognition, so you can make a Scratch project that responds to voice commands. So you can adding these modules that are created by others, and then add them to Scratch.
And I would imagine that adds a sort of an accessibility layer in for different types of learners as well.
And that's so important. We really want to make sure to make these opportunities available for everyone, for all kids from all backgrounds, of all abilities.
Okay. Well, it's been a massive pleasure to meet you, and thank you so much.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thanks, Mitch. This reminded me of the recording we made back in September at the Edtech Podcast Festival with Shafina Vohra, Head of Faculty Options at the London Design and Engineering UTC, and Annie Duffield at the Institute of Imagination. Here they are in full flow.
For me, it was this whole concept of why students in year 7 in my previous schools would say to me, "Miss, science is so boring." And I'd look at them and I'd say, "Thank you." Like, I'm not a science teacher, but Thank you. Why is it boring? We never get to do anything fun. And so I started thinking about what is this fun aspect when they're coming from primary schools, which I hope are steering, more imaginative play and creative dialogue, to then suddenly structured classroom seating, staring at a board and a teacher throwing out keywords and concepts that they've never heard before. So I started questioning these kinds of things and developed simple ideas of using basic Lego and using different ideas really just within my Lego techniques that I have personally developed over the years and applying them within lessons. And then came along Lego Education, which allowed me to certify within that. So I can now sort of certify and train teachers and students in universities. But within my classroom, my psychology classroom, you will see students tinkering with Lego all the time. They're thinking, they're learning, they're creating, they're problem solving, and that's because the hands do it all for them. How many of us love to play? Just anything. How many of us love to play? So why are we not letting our kids play in their classrooms? Why? And you might say, schemes of work, teacher time, we've got to teach the test, blah, blah, blah. I've actually taken risks in my classroom where I've taken lesson time out to give them that time to actually play with Lego. In their heads, they're thinking they're playing. And by the end of that, they've learned so much. And it's also because the brain we have 5 sensory mechanisms for processing available to the brain. So why are we just using the eyes and the ears? Why are we not using our hands? Why is handwriting so poor nowadays? So there's lots of things that you can do as teachers, as educators, to think about how can we bring in very simple, not even time-consuming aspects to using your hands to better your learning. This directly feeds into my PhD currently, where I'm also researching scientifically how using hands-on learning, using Lego's my focus, to trigger creativity and intrinsic motivation specifically. Because I do think that when a child is in charge of their own learning, they're just going to get on with it. So there's so many things that your hands can do for you. If I was to ask you a Lego education question, put your hands behind your backs, and if you were to describe to the person sitting next to you or beside you how to tie their shoelaces, how many of you can do it without your hands? Okay, come on, and get the child to tie their 2 shoelaces perfectly. So for me, it is play with your hands, get them learning in as many different ways as we can.
Thank you very much. And Annie, at the Institute of Imagination, how does that play out as well?
Yeah, so just to give it a bit of context, the Institute of Imagination, we exist to champion and explore the power of imagination. And we do that through a variety of ways. That's activities, events, research, training. But today I'm particularly focusing on the programme of activities that we run out of the Imagination Lab, where we work with a variety of partners, one of which is Lego. And we work with amazing volunteers and facilitators, such as Shafina, who bring that amazing element of knowledge and understanding about the way that those learning programmes work directly to the children that we interact with. For us, hands-on learning is everything that's just been said, but the way that we like to talk about it is hands-on, brains-on. So you have that active participation in the learning process. You're creating something, be it physical, digital, or conceptual, but you're thinking at the same time. It's not just about what's going on with your hands, it's what's going on in your head. So by providing a space which is child-led, where children are able to follow their own lines of intuition, the learning process is really deepened, we feel. And you can see absolute benefits from that when you give the child the confidence to follow their own intuition and to discover the questions that they want the answers to, rather than us presenting them with a set process of how this bit of hands-on learning might look at the end of it. Then the improvements you see in their confidence, their well-being, their creativity, it just shows. It shows on their faces, it shows in their excitement when they talk about what they've been doing. So we really try to connect children to experts like Shafina just to make sure that they're really getting that benefit, because that was a great description, wasn't it?
Well, and Shafina, so you kind of alluded to the psychology of hands-on learning, and obviously that's one of your kind of areas of expertise. I know when we spoke before that you also mentioned applying hands-on learning, in your opinion, is not just important from the learner point of view, but also from the person taking the class, who might have perhaps done the same lesson, and there's a potential to kind of switch off or become disengaged also as the teacher.
Yes, and that's one of the things that I'm happy to share here. So, for example, for some of you who may know any of psychology, there's a Stanford prison experiment that Philip Zimbardo did. It's on every university program, on every A-level program. It's a core key study for A-level psychology. One of the skills we need for examination purposes is critical thinking. It's an assessment objective 3, which is evaluation and the what-if scenarios, the contrasting evidence. And I find that a lot of students with the new A-levels and the new curriculum reforms find that really difficult. And so I thought, right, if I could use Lego for them to build their models or their representation of the Stanford prison experiment, that itself creates questions. So I'm not doing anything. They've built this model, and then I have to say, right, okay, how could this have been improved, which is directly their evaluation skills for exam. And all they're doing is moving things around, looking at it from different dimensions because they can, because it's a 3D model of Lego. And that fosters so much discussion in the classroom, to the point where we had about 21 evaluation points and the exam board only needs 3. We had 21 evaluation points come out just from doing a simple task like that. And so it is about the fact that a teacher themselves, I know me, having to teach the same thing year in, year out until the syllabus changes is daunting. And if I'm going to lose my own motivation and my own sort of passion, then what's going to happen to them? So I've got to be on top of it from my end as well. And it shouldn't be that you teach the same lesson 5 years in a row. There should be an element of creativity going on in that for teachers themselves, because we have so much to do. And I just think if I'm going to enjoy it, then they're going to enjoy it. And they do.
If creativity and play are all important, what could be more important than finding out about Ben Callicott's new enterprise, the Toy Pioneers Club? No doubt, if you visited BET, you saw a lot of programmable robotics, so no doubt Ben will be busy for the foreseeable. Great, so I'm here with Ben Callicott.
Hi.
Who a few of you might know from Primo Toys days.
Yeah, the good times.
It's the Friday at BET, and we've just been having a catch up about your new venture and sort of the culmination, I suppose, of working across both the education and toy product design spaces, if I can describe it as that.
Yeah.
So, for the sakes of our listeners who didn't listen into that part of the conversation, perhaps you can explain a little bit about who you are, how you got into all of this, and what your latest venture is as well.
Thank you, Sophie. My background's traditionally in toy design. So I've been sort of working in that field for over 10 years now. More kind of like consumer toys. So my background's working for Early Learning Centre and Mother Care. Then I decided to develop my own toy product, a den fort making construction kit called Plug, and went through that whole journey of building my own business with an old friend of mine from sort of start to finish, and then sort of fell in love with the kind of the business creation as well as the element of design, and I discovered Primo Toys over 4 years ago, and whilst my own thing was maybe not going quite as I had planned, I sort of jumped in and joined Primo in the early days because I just absolutely kind of loved the idea of what Cubetto and Primo were doing around teaching children these sort of future skills around computational thinking and teaching them about coding and programming, and sort of seeing them use the products and really engage and kind of sort of seeing them really, it's a bit cliche, but that, learning through play is completely true when I see the kids using the play set. So I was with Primo for 4 years and went through the whole development of the product, and we went through the Kickstarter campaigns and getting it to market. So sort of really fell in love with the educational side of toys and products, and sort of wanted to sort of share those experiences. So now I've actually, as of last year, I've opened up the waiting list for a new initiative of mine, which is called the Toy Pioneers Club. So what I'm really trying to do is get sort of toy startups, sort of edtech startups that are driven by a value and a purpose, and to form a community for them to come together, virtual community, to sort of some peer-to-peer networking, some webinars, and to really learn and gain all the resources and knowledge they need to go and build better businesses and products than the ones that exist today. So it's a bit of a long-term, play. But
Interesting. So the Toy Pioneers Club. So do you have any kind of startups already in the club? Where are we at with the development of that?
Yeah. So at the sort of early stage of 2018, I managed to get sort of 13, 14 startups onto a Slack channel, really just to sort of myself figure out what it means to try and build community. And those startups themselves are sort of crossing over. Some of them are sort of exhibiting here at BET. So Marbotic, for example, we're part of the club. And there's a Robotical up in Scotland, a part of that as well. But then we've got more consumer sort of focused toys that all have a purpose. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. I sort of realized from that experience that building community is hard and it's going to take a long time. So near the end of last year, I sort of took a step back from that initial group just to refocus what I want this to become. And then as of October last year, I launched it officially with the website, opening up the waiting list, and then hopefully over the next coming months, we'll then sort of open up applications for startups to join the club.
Okay, and so if I'm a startup that wants to join a club, how much does it cost? What do I get in return? And is it like an accelerator program?
Great.
Is it an incubator? What is it?
Good questions, all valid. So the sign up will be it'll be an application based. So there'll be sort of a set criteria to get into the club. So that's mainly going to be around like how old is your business, the size of your business, what are your values, what is it that you're trying to sort of promote and do. And that there'll be a free component to it. So that'll be sort of members directory, forums, sort of webinar access, and then there will be a paid element most likely that's yet to be kind of defined. I'm still kind of trying to work that out myself, which will be more focused on sort of access to actual like resources that you can, tangible resources you can use, probably a bit of one-to-one sort of expert coaching, mentoring, and access to a range of industry experts. Yeah, it's a tricky one. I talk to a lot of founders, and I feel there's a bit of expectation that they're just going to kind of skyrocket sales. And I think the reality is that when you're dealing in relatively high value product, they're not these kind of electronic products inherently are expensive because they cost a lot, relatively a lot to make, that you've then got a market that you haven't got a mass market out there that are going to be able to buy lots of these products. So you've got to really understand your expectations that you won't be selling hundreds and thousands of these units, and therefore if you're sort of but you need the investment because you need the capital to sort of develop these products, but at the same time the return on that investment probably is going to be a long-term gain, not a short-term. So part of what I'm trying to do with the club is also trying to educate that message as well, and that's sort of what I've learned from my own experience and my own observations of the industry.
So if people want to sign up and see if you're going to accept them into the club, are you on Twitter as well?
I'm not. The club's not on Twitter.
The club's not on Twitter. It's like Fight Club.
It's like Fight Club, yeah. The best places to go is toypioneers.club.
Okay.
You can connect with me on LinkedIn, Ben Calicott as well. Social presence will be growing, but it's about managing what I can actually manage myself with the time I have. But no, that's the best place to go. There's the waiting list, register details, and hopefully over the coming months it will be going live.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Ben.
Thank you very much, Sophie.
And finally, I caught up with the indisputable force Ian Hurd about AI, creativity and emotions. I'm excited to work with his students in 2019 on the podcast.
Brilliant. It's got lots of features. Hello.
So I've just we were just wrapping up like almost an hour conversation about pretty much everything, and it was really interesting. And then I thought, why aren't we recording this? And I was with Ian Hurd. So welcome, Ian.
Welcome. Hello.
So Ian, can you tell all of our listeners who you are? Who are you? What have you been up to?
I am a person. I'm not a bot. I teach media and creative arts at various institutions, and I've just completed my master's degree at the Institute of Education Knowledge Lab in Education Technology. So that's who I am and where I'm at
And you were telling me that you're sort of in the masters. It was a lot of it was focused on AI and its impact on creativity, and that was where we kind of went down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, I mean that was my focus. That was my concentration for my research, looking at what factors are important for the development of AI, and looking into how my research was looking into how we can affect non-cognitive factors that have been shown empirically to affect creativity. But then there was people would choose their own focuses on the masters. But we spoke about the design and use of technology in education module that we did, which was an elective module. And obviously we were working in groups for that, learning about how to think about things like knowledge representation, which can then be the support and be the thing that machine learning and artificial intelligence learns from and uses as a model to help define and direct that learning. So that was our focus on there, rather than the technical aspects of it. We didn't do coding and programming. There were people on the course who were interested in that, who would take it forward. But our concern was looking at the implications of that, so ethical implications, and also from a very practical perspective as well. What are the implications for developing this technology? How does it work in a practical context, in a classroom or whatnot? So that was quite a large part of it, and it was very, very interesting.
And part of that we were speaking about was around the connection between emotion and creativity, or happiness and creativity. So how did that all play out? It
was very, very interesting. I mean, there's lots of research into creativity and creativity support systems and these kind of things. But I wanted to move past that. I found a paper by someone actually that was going to be talking at the learning exhibition at UCL Knowledge Lab, across UCL actually, last year. And the paper was about how we can start developing AI that can actually respond to emotions and be act as like a kind of a mentor, or provide mentor-like features. And that kind of sparked my interest in how we can then link something like that up to things like those non-cognitive features, non-cognitive skills that people have, which actually affect their creativity. So there are certain ones that affect creativity, and we can actually use AI to support them in things like user experience and things like that. So that was quite interesting for me. How we can do that. You can't force people to be creative, but you can help get them into a space where it's more possible. You can create the circumstances for creativity. People need to be happy to be creative, and they don't necessarily need to be happy all the time. They just don't need to be sad, and they need to feel safe, and they need to trust the environment they're in. And in that situation, actually from a brain perspective, it opens up cognitive fluency, which enables creativity to become more likely.
And how about the academic that you mentioned was here on Wednesday, and what they were talking about as well?
Yeah, what was his name? Dr. Mark, I'll call him for now. And he was talking about, he was basically mirroring what I was saying, really, that people can't be happy all the time, and that shouldn't be our aim. And it's not about that. It's about emotional intelligence and giving people the skills to be able to, not be sad all the time, and not read signals incorrectly, and be more resilient socially. Those are the things, just to be more balanced. So we're not enforcing certain positive states. It's more about creating a situation where people can perceive things around them in a logical but emotionally intelligent way, which will help them no end. It helps learning just in general, but especially for things like to be creative. It really helps to be emotionally intelligent, because then you're more likely to be in a situation where that part of your mind opens up, and the possibilities for being creative, that divergent thinking.
You're not kind of constantly fighting fires that perhaps aren't there or aren't really important. So.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot that can get in the way of education, and a lot, obviously, being creative and wanting to be creative, people to be creative in educational contexts. is the same as wanting someone to learn maths or whatnot. People have got to be in a good place. There's lots of things that are barriers to learning. Learning is a very specific experience that involves focus and generally just feelings of being safe. So those are, especially these days, kids, and like Dr. Mark was saying, about depression and things like that, being a massive issue, mental health being a massive issue. We need to be able to foster those environments, and we need every tool at our disposal. And one of those is using AI more effectively, and one of those is being a good teacher that is able to embed those kind of 21st century skills and emotional intelligence into the curriculum in clever ways.
Well, and can you tell us about your work doing exactly that as well, and your new job? I don't know if you're in a position to kind of talk about that.
Still waiting for the references to go through. I'm pretty sure I'll be taken on. But yeah, so working with a London Borough, let's say, further education institution, which is part of a large consortium. Working with my media students, for example, one of the first things I do, rather than trying to talk about how we embed soft skills, it's something that we just do all of the time. It's part of everything that they do. How to do things effectively, how to be resilient, how to communicate, how to collaborate. These are all just things that happen every single day, and I give feedback on because it's part of the course. The courses we run, which are University Arts London courses, are more to do with problem-based learning, and so it fits in well with that to teach, or to encourage 21st century skills as a precursor to actually starting on, any kind of live briefs where learners are suddenly, in the throes of working together and as individuals in a flexible environmental context. It's really important to have that.
So I can imagine that if I'm a teacher listening in and I've got a student and they need to build their resilience, I can think of this as an example. It's that kind of difficult conversation thing, isn't it? So, if perhaps they sort of say, no, this is too difficult, or I can't do it, or burst into tears, how do you deal with that, and how do you approach that kind of critically but constructively?
Well, for me, the most important thing that I can do with my learners is engender and maintain that trust. And so if I do that, I like to think that if there are situations like that I can say the right things to help encourage them and inspire them and show them things, but that's part of the training at the start of the course, is to show people that actually they can transcend their own boundaries. And usually a lot of their own boundaries are really just generated over time and are pretty mythical. People can do all kinds of things. So I inspire kids by showing them how that's done. And also my own journeys, like when I've got 2 master's degrees now. I didn't tell you this, but
you're collecting them.
I'm collecting them, yeah. Actually, one of my doctors called me a collector, but I don't know. But I did the last one I did was quite a while ago. But when I did it, I wasn't sure whether I could do it or not. And a friend of mine said, "You'll be fine," and I did it, and I passed with distinction. And I was taken aback after that, reflecting on it, just thinking I didn't think I'd be able to pass this, and I exceeded. Way exceeded my own expectations. And it's like stories like that. I don't like to talk about myself. There's plenty of other people who've done great stuff.
No, but everyone can relate to that idea of thinking, I can't do it, and then if they do take the leap, thinking, actually I'm the other side of that, and why didn't I do it earlier, or why didn't I
and a lot of resilience is about how to deal with problems in the moment, and prioritizing and thinking critically about what needs to be done next. And then just kind of working through that, and eventually you succeed in achieving something, and that's what resilience is, because that's the buzz. Once you do it, you get that buzz, and it's an eye-opener. It's a real revelation, actually. You suddenly realise that you can do things you didn't think you would be able to do.
And so what are you going to do next?
Just continue. My passion at the moment is in lifelong learning, and I've got a project I'm working on to help people who are either in work, going into work. They could be coming at colleges or in colleges. There could be people who are career transitioning. Because I've had a lot of friends and colleagues who've gone through this, and it inspired me to develop a platform for challenge-based opportunities that work with employers and also individuals to develop those 21st century skills, and also give them something that they can put on on an interactive CV, so they can actually find new work and go in between different types of employment prospects, which is going to be really important when automation takes hold.
Well, thank you so much, and thanks for sharing your work with us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Last week, I packed in dinners at the House of Commons, learning about professional development across Teach First and innovative schools in Devon, plus why money isn't the answer solely to closing the attainment gap, and how blockchain may help to provide learners without identity new access to teaching and learning, jobs and the skilled economy. Congrats to all those who are at the Educate graduation ceremony, and keep your ears primed for a trailer for our new podcast series coming soon. I'm busy binge reading Sir Anthony Seldon's 4th Education Revolution, along with all those in our book club, so why not message us with what you're reading or listening to? On that note, thanks very much to Hussein Ayed, founder at Tutor Edit, who got in touch to say, "Hey Sophie, I've been following the podcast for a while since I'm in the industry and wanted to let you guys know you're doing us a major service, so a big thank you." We're looking forward to bringing you new recordings with educational researchers trying to crack some of teaching and learning's hardest nuts, so keep a lookout for that and our new series coming soon. And that's all for now. Have a great week.